At the launch of Season of the Deep, a handful of exotics that were slightly underperforming or slightly underused were buffed. Some of these were very good, and some of these were fine. They didn't ultimately do a whole lot. Nevertheless, I do believe that there are a list of other exotics that still don't get a lot of love and are, generally speaking, agreed upon by the community as being at best mid and at worst completely power crept out of the game. So let's fix a couple of them, starting with the Apotheosis Veil. Is a holdout relic from Destiny 1 that has never really found its place in Destiny 2. It's certainly not a terrible exotic, as it's never in a spot where it doesn't have at least some value, but the value that it provides is minimal, and worse than that, it doesn't give you great feedback. The rest of your teammates don't really have a good indication as to whether they're getting the buff, and you don't really get a great indication either, so it just doesn't feel good to use. Not to mention, popping your super at low health can be pretty clutch to get that health back, but most of the time supers are going to be relatively premeditated, or they're going to be so lethal that that health back isn't really going to matter. Yes, you do get your ability energy backs as well, but who really cares? So let's change its functionality slightly. Let's keep what it currently has and add on to the ability for all elemental pickups while wearing the Apotheosis Veil to grant a small bump in your super energy. This would allow you to get to your super slightly faster and have more of its actual value that it's trying to get, as well as kind of recontextualizing some of your kit. You could actually start playing around the elemental pickups like Void Breaches, the Fire Sprites, the Ionic Traces, and so on, to actually have more utility for a specific idea within your kit. But let's move on to the Titans and talk about the Mask of the Quiet One. Has seen a bit of a resurgence, as now the Echo of Vigilance actually gives it some context where it can actually find some use, but it's still questionable when you're actually going to want to use this thing. I still feel like there is so much untapped potential for a Titan to play taking damage gives you some kind of benefit type of Berserker. We have similar ideas like that, but nothing that really plays into it, so let's lean in on this a little bit for some of these subclass verbs that they don't have great access to. Specifically, let's remove that tiny itty bitty, mostly insignificant bit of health that you get when you're critically wounded, because the helmet only gives health and not shield, and instead replace it with a subclass specific elemental buff. For Void, it would be invisibility for a very brief amount of time with a relatively long internal cooldown so that they can't keep spamming it. For Solar, this would be Radiance. For Arc, Amplified. You get the idea. I think this one could be a little bit dangerous, but I think this would open up the kit for the Titans. Let's move on to Blight Ranger. An exotic that looks so damn cool and has been reworked but still hasn't really found a place in the game. If I may be blunt, I want this helmet to be way cooler because it looks way cooler. So let's give it a little bit of neutral game benefit and actually improve the Hunter's Blink when wearing this. This wouldn't be quite as good as the Astrocyte Verse, as I still do feel like Warlocks are supposed to be the Blink Masters, but this would be something like, you know, maybe maintaining your radar, whereas Astrocyte gives you both the radar, the handling, and the distance. Hunters already have things like Amplified, as they are going to be on Arc, so just giving them the ability to keep radar is a small benefit, but it does kind of help out just giving this a little bit more utility as a whole. Not to mention that the not swap modifier is now a thing, meaning that you're probably never going to be hot swapping to this thing in any context ever anyway, so you're already going to have to play around it. Let's give it some of that utility and move on to the next one. Knucklehead Radar does what it needs to do, and it does it perfectly fine. Unfortunately, what it does do is rather limited. You maintain your radar while ADS'd, and when you're crouched, you get an enhanced radar. On paper, those do allow you to maintain your awareness much better than you currently have, but the problem with this is kind of what happened with the Oathkeepers, in that once you get good with it, it sort of loses its punch. It loses its ability to really be special, because you basically, the player itself sheds it as if it were training wheels. You don't need the training wheels that the Knucklehead Radar provides once you get good at knowing when and having an instinct for checking your radar. This is both for PvE and PvP. Not to mention in PvE, having your radar up all the time is pretty darn useless, because you generally know where the enemies are because they make a lot of noise. Let's give this a bit more utility and actually lean into this exotic as being a sort of hard scope, aim down the sights and keep your target in your sights type exotic. Let's give it a similar effect to what we would have for like no distractions or box breathing, and give your weapon, maybe just your kinetic weapon to give kinetics more of a chance to shine, a boost to range on the first shot of your attack after aiming down sights. This would encourage you to stay ADS without punishing you because you don't lose your radar, and would actually give you a small benefit, something that a hand cannon would actually really benefit from. It's basically giving your kinetic weapons opening shot for free, which can be really, really nice. Let's circle back to Warlocks and talk about... Nova Bomb has always struggled to find a place in the game once Well was created. Well pretty much recontextualized all of the Warlocks kits, and then Nova Bomb is only really used by the die-hard fans or the people who just love purple space magic, of which I am one of them. Skull of Dire Ahamkara never really found a terrific place in the game, and especially with the nerfs to the super exotic armors that happened way long ago, where the maximum you'll ever be able to get is 50%, which on paper sounds good, but in practice means that you're never actually going to get a really big juicy return. And being that Nova Bomb really isn't the thing that you're probably going to be throwing into a group of ads, you're probably more looking to sink this in on a boss or a bigger type enemy to actually deal some DPS. Throwing a Nova Bomb in a group of ads feels so bad, especially with the rest of the Warlocks kit. Let's give this some more usability, and maybe there's a couple things we could do here. The first idea that comes to mind is to make this similar in idea to something like the Celestial Nighthawk and actually give it more damage. Your Nova Bomb gains more damage the longer it travels, or we could take it the direction that the Eternal Warrior got and give Void weapons an increase in Void damage as you continue to get kills, and it immediately stacks up to full as soon as you pop your super, exactly the same as the Eternal Warrior, but again, recontextualized for Warlock and Void. I know some people are going to throw out the other exotics that buff your supers, but I feel like generally speaking, they do what they need to do and they do something unique enough that it stays within its lane while still being useful. So let's move on to the ACD0 feedback fence. Now that the ACDs work with a glaive, these do feel a bit better, but they still, again, find a hard time actually seeing any value, specifically as you get higher and higher and higher. You're not trying to get meleeed in most cases. Let's change this up to make it to where the damage resistance that you get triggers on all damage types, or maybe only when you break your shield after you take that initial shot of damage. In other words, it's not something that's constantly passive after you get a melee kill like they currently are. It'll just pretty much always protect you on that first shot, but rather once you get your Fury Conductor stacks, after you take that bit of damage, then the damage resistance will kick in, which will still allow one-shot type weapons to kill you if you're in PvP, but it allows you to brawl, which I really feel like these are trying to go for, but with melee exotics getting better and better and these just not, it's just gonna have to find a different way to do that. But next up, let's talk about... I've had some people tell me that they simp this exotic armor piece, and I don't really know why, as I feel like these are not really a hunter's best friend when it comes to arc. I feel like there are better options out there. Why not buff it anyway, being that this is not something that anybody's complaining about, and let's be honest, arc bolts aren't really the best choice for PvE, and for PvP they've gotten a bit worse since the nerfs as well. Why not make the Lucky Raspberries, maybe while amplified, cause a blinding effect? This not only starts to include some anti-champion abilities, which is something I always encourage because I absolutely hate champions, and I think many people do as well, but recontextualizes your arc bolt for the rest of your kit and opens up other fragments to have some additional use with these as well. That little bit of extra blind would help a lot. Wings of Sacred Dawn is a difficult exotic to work with because they have a very specific niche. They do that niche well, but the niche is very small. How do you make an exotic that reduces incoming damage basically for free get more value without being broken or annoying to deal with? This is definitely more of a PvP type exotic, as that's really where you're going to see repositioning into the air be a real big value, whereas something like that in PvE, you're really only using it for the damage resistance. I suggest something as simple as, while you are in the air, while you have that Tome of Dawn effect active, kills with solar weapons have a chance of creating a fire sprite. Similarly, we would also have a similar cooldown so that you couldn't keep spamming fire sprites out of enemies, but this does kind of open up the exotic to have more functionality for it. You can play further around fire sprites with your kit. It gives it a little bit of something with hopefully not breaking outside the bounds of what it's trying to do, and it also encourages you to actually go pick up and collect the things rather than just camping in one spot, which I feel like is the danger with these. But speaking of solar chess pieces, Hollow Fireheart is like the worst version of the Heart of Inmost Light, and man, that's some stiff competition. Heart of Inmost Light has been a staple in the Titans repertoire forever, and being that Hollow Fireheart is a subclass specific type exotic, but just worse, man, what do you do about that? Well, I think the way that you change this is that while you have your supercharge, you allow all scorched targets to cause an ignition, again with an internal cooldown timer. Holding your super is such a weird idea for a lot of different exotics. There's a handful of exotics that build around that idea, and none of them are terrific. Hollow Fireheart suffers the worst because the Solar Titan's abilities come back quickly already, allowing all scorched targets to cause ignitions, which would require you to invest in ability to begin with, would create a sort of ad clear niche for this exotic, of which it doesn't really have any niche at all right now while Heart of Inmost Light is existing. Again, this is a dangerous change, but I think one that at least needs to be tested out and experimented with just to give something to the Hollow Fireheart, because dang, this thing sucks. The Wyvern Vest is another super specific exotic that has never really found a place, specifically because spectral blades in PvE and PvP are just okay. As I was researching this and thinking about this more, something I had kind of forgotten about because it doesn't come up that often, as I don't really use it that often in PvE where this would find value, is that the heavy attack from the spectral blades actually weakens the target. And I thought to myself, but why would I do that when I have Tether? Tether's just a better source of weaken. Maybe I can get more burst DPS by myself because Tether requires me to have a teammate to really see its maximum effect, but even still, that's not something I really want to play around. Why don't we make Wyvern Vest basically become a mobile version of Tether, where you can pick and choose as if you were using the old version of the Tether's quiver effect, where you can go from target to target and weakening them and giving them a weakening effect similar to that of a Tether while also suppressing them at the same time. This could allow you to maybe spread out weakening that you're doing to one specific target, or spread it between multiple targets in an area where maybe the Tether is not quite big enough. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Subscribe, you got this far anyway. Bless your faces, and deuces.